Also running, announcing he's running this week, this is cut 2 done, Newt Gingrich, the former House Speaker.
Security, to an American energy program, to a balanced budget. I worked with President Ronald Reagan.
All right. I'm taking hope off the table. No one's allowed to use hope anymore, right? That may be the most.
Steal that soundtrack from. That was horrible. The little music soundtrack.
I think he was on hold with somebody there,
No,
but
I think it was a kinder, gentler Newt.
Is that what it
I
is?
think he's trying to overcome that image of.
Well, he's glad Ron Paul jumped in because this makes him only the second oldest candidate now. But
And the third least popular.
But seriously, what? Again, I don't know. What makes Newt Gingrich think this is going to happen? Anybody see him sort of maybe sifting his way to the top here?
Well, I mean, it possibly could happen, but again, you have to look at, when you're talking that issue, you have to look at whose base of support. Is Romney going to cut into any of his, or is he going to cut into Romney's? And those are the issues. I don't know how high he would get, but I think, it's almost like, okay, we took a chance on hope and change with a guy with no real credentials and no real experience, I think is how the former speaker's going to carry it. And so I'm a guy with all kind of experience, with all kind of
Except that he's a real Washington insider. It doesn't seem to me like you'd want your main calling card to be, boy, I spent a lot of time in Washington, now I want to go and fix it.
If the thought is we put an outsider in and he's just thoroughly screwed things up, I mean, if that's your message, that you had a newbie come in and he's screwed things up, and you do
We're
want
going to go
someone
back to the
experienced.
insider.
Well, yeah, I presume that's what his message is going to be.
We've only elected one Speaker of the House president, ever.
In the 1800s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think just beyond that, he's not an appealing personality in so many ways. The more exposure
No,
you get to
Elaine,
him-
what are you talking
I know.
about?
And again, if we were back in the days when we would only learn about him through newspaper reports, or maybe he would come through town and do a little bit of stumping, that was your only personal exposure to him, that'd be one thing. But
Right.
you're going to see him on TV all the time, you're going to hear his voice constantly, we're going to be reminded, we're going to be replayed, all those very unpresidential clips of him, back in his really rough and tumble days, and I just don't think people are going to see him as a presidential candidate.
A lot of people are saying, look at these Republicans, they don't have a front runner, they're in disarray, what a mess. I think this is the fate of both parties. I think the Republicans just got there first. You take Barack Obama out of the mix, let's say he's reelected and that's it. 2 terms, he's done. Who do they have?
Hillary.
Come on. I mean, they have Hillary and a bunch of people we've never heard of. I mean, both political parties right now, I think, are entering their new phase of irrelevance to most people. And I think I think it's just happening to the Republicans sooner. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with one party as opposed to the other. I think both parties are entering a low period as far as people who are drawn to run, people who see the parties as relevant, Americans identifying themselves as strictly Republican or strictly as a Democrat.
Well, but the problem is that if you want to enter public service, then the parties are relevant, because you're going to have to work within a party structure to get that done. But you kind of used an interesting word, and we were earlier talking about the low voter turnout that's predicted for our city elections, and that's the word I use often, and that is candidates fail to make citizens understand that they have a relevance in their everyday life. And if you have no relevance, then people aren't going to vote and aren't going to care.
I agree, because when you were talking about the Democrats and the Republicans, the federal side, I was thinking local politics as well. I mean, nobody wants those jobs. They're very difficult jobs, a lot of criticism. And what's the upside to doing those jobs unless you're a lifer or somebody that...
Elaine, won't the Democrats in 2016 look kind of like the Republicans do today in the sense of not really having any frontrunners?
Well, I don't think that it is true that there are not candidates out there. Part of that is the way that politics gets covered at the national level, which makes some sense, right? The New York Times isn't out there on a regular basis combing down at the local level and being like, who's a great governor? Sort of we wait for something to happen, an issue surfaces, so then maybe a governor or somebody who's at the state legislature level who might move up to the national level and then be a presidential candidate. candidate, we're not looking for those people until we're looking for those people, until something calls them to our attention. So I don't think it's I mean, even here in Texas, you know, the local Democratic Party and the state Democratic Party is working very hard on grooming some future leaders. You know, we all kind of chuckle sometimes now when somebody says, well, Julian Castro may be the first, you know, Latino president, but there is certainly that thought that who is that person going to be, and isn't there a good chance they'd come from Texas, and isn't there a good chance then they'd be a Democrat, and those people are being groomed and moving up through the ranks. So it's too early to say that
I'm
we're
sure
gonna
there's
be at
people
that
in
point.
movement,
Yeah.
in motion, but I'm just saying I
Yeah.
think you're going to find that, I mean, if you want to go back and look, the Democrats have nominated who in the last few cycles? They've had Barack Obama, who's an exceptional figure. You kind of have to take him out and put him in his own category, right? But before that, you've got Bill Clinton, who was just a last man standing kind of
Right.
guy. His opportunity came because other Democrats didn't think they could beat Bush 41.
But he also was a remarkable candidate. I mean, he has that.
He turned out to be, but
Yeah.
he was kind of from
And nobody knew who he
the back
was.
of the pack,
But,
Elaine.
but then there was that sense that the Democrats have nobody, and
Right.
that's when you kind of suddenly find these people who've just been
I
obscured
agree.
by the media noise.
But
So-
I mean, there was no
Yeah.
sense that he had
Yeah.
been coming, that he was in motion, grooming. In fact, 4 years before, remember,
Yeah.
it was thought that he had killed his political career with that really long
Yeah.
speech he gave. And, you know, Mike Dukakis, another kind of last man
Mm-hmm.
standing nominee. Republicans, Bob Dole. Maybe Bush is an exceptional figure because he was the son of a president, so you kind of
Mm-hmm.
throw him out. But you know, Dole, McCain. It doesn't look to me like the parties are churning up a steady crop of here's who's next like they used to.
Chris Christie from New Jersey.
Doesn't
Or-
want it. Doesn't want
Not
it.
right now, but how about in 4 years?
Yeah, but you know, if you really have the fire in the belly and people are begging you, people went from Iowa, got on a plane and flew to New Jersey to beg him. I mean, if you can resist that, Louis, I don't think you really want it.
Well, no, but I think there's a idea to timing is everything, and I think that he might realize it's too soon for his time right now. But even if people
What
are
would
begging
be
you,
the
there has
downside of if you really wanted it? What would be the downside of running once and getting ready to run a second time? Reagan ran 3 times. Lots of presidents have run for president more than once.
well, I think
There's
it all,
nothing fatal about that.
No, but I think it all depends on what he feels that he has to do up in his state. In other words, if spending all the time on the trail is going to detract from him having success in his state, then that's going to hurt his record down the road if he does want to run 4 years
I guess the
out.
point I was making is just I think that people are resisting the call more, and I think parties are less and less effective at going to you and saying, you're the man of the moment, you've got to do this. There was probably a time in American political history where the party bosses could get in the face of a governor and say, look, you're the guy, you've got to, if you're a good Democrat, you've got to do this. We don't care what's going on in your state or that you want 2 more years or whatever. You need to do this. And that kind of
Well, that happened to
suasion
Bush,
is
didn't it?
gone.
Didn't that happen to George W. Bush? They said, "Hey, now's the time. You've got to do it."
Well, I'm just saying. I think that's disappearing from both political parties.
We have made the job into something that is almost an impossible job, and the process that you go through to become that person, I think, is an incredibly distasteful process to many people. It's almost to where like when it starts to really appeal to megalomaniacs like Donald Trump.
Who could you be?
And I'm also going to go ahead and put Ron Paul. I mean, when we were talking about why is Ron Paul running, let's not discount ego out of that. It takes a certain kind of ego
Sure.
at this point to imagine that you might be, because you're no longer just an executive, which is what we sort of originally designed the post as. Now you are essentially like our royalty, our head of state with this incredible power focused on you. So
It's got to be something because again, you mentioned Chris Christie, Louis, who I really like. I mean, I'm one of those people who gets weak in the knees or the thrill up the leg or whatever. But I'm now really convinced that he has taken a look at this and said, you know, I'm not going to put myself through that.
Yeah.
It's not that New Jersey couldn't spare him. I mean, come on. And the same thing with this Mitch Daniels, whose wife apparently is going to be the deciding factor. She is very, very reluctant for him to do this, and given the state of their marriage, maybe he can't, afford to defy her on this. But I mean, what does it say that even when people in your party are begging you, which is a very flattering thing, whoever gets begged like this, these guys are saying, nope, I've looked at it and I'm not interested.
Yeah, but a couple of things. Back when you're saying the party bosses could kind of demand that, you'd have to respond. We had a different system where then if you later wanted to do something, it was going to be hard to do it because the party bosses said, wait a second, you didn't respond when we needed you, so we're not going to help you now. But now when we have the ability to go directly to the media, their power has diminished, for better or for worse, but their power has diminished in that regard.
By the way, James Polk was the speaker
Okay.
who became president. Not directly from Speaker. But
Did you have a stamp?
Had been Speaker. I did not have a Polk stamp. Was there one? Now I feel I should have had one.
That's the question.
Louis has ruined this day for me.
Yeah, there
All right,
was. There
we're
was-
back with
there
the. Was there?
Yeah,
Darn
because
it.
there was a series of stamps of all the presidents at one time.
Maybe we can work out a trade.
All right.
We'll come back with a lightning round on Gang of Four, but first 11:23 into the KTSA newsroom.
I'm busy. Go away.
Kevin Hillary Clinton had the listening tour. Come on.
I know. Also talk about an unexciting announcement. It just doesn't sound exciting.
I'm
Yeah.
forming a committee.
Thinking
Does
about
not
it.
sound the same as I've come to save the country. That's what we want to hear. All right, let's talk about a few things here very briefly before we turn loose the gang for the weekend. I had some fun with this week. I guess it's obviously not funny to some Native Americans who take offense at the fact that when the SEALs went in to Abbottabad, they had codenamed Osama bin Laden Geronimo. And so the message that we got him is Geronimo killed in action. Is this the same thing as saying that Geronimo was a terrorist or Geronimo was a mass murderer? I mean, really?
How many of those World War II movies did you see where people,
Thank you.
dropped out of the
Yes.
planes
But-
yelling Geronimo?
But they would say, well, that was a positive association. Those were heroes going off to fight a good cause. But in this case, we were referring to bin Laden as Geronimo.
No, I think that what you and I have talked about before many times is that some people will look to be offended for any reason possible. And that's one of those.
Do these Apache tribes, Elaine, do they maybe have a point? Could a better
It
nickname
is a
have been
very
chosen?
large language with many, many words and names in it. So yeah, I think we could have picked
Could have used a
something
different
else
name.
and it
Called him
really- yeah.
Hitler or something, or some name that nobody would, say, hey, what about the good side of that man, or whatever. As you mentioned, Native Americans do get a lot of the Native American names do get a lot of use in the military. We have all the Native American names for the helicopters, and Geronimo is what the paratroopers cry out, and
Right, but there also are Native American poets in particular who've made the point that you basically exterminate a people and then you name something after them. I mean, that's a little bit of cold comfort at the end of the day. So.
I think we maybe have some unsorted emotions about our past. Is that what you're saying? We haven't sorted it all out yet.
Bit, yeah. Those
maybe
are
a little.
unresolved issues.
All right,
Issues, yeah.
don't we all? All right. I thought this was interesting. I just saw this morning. It happened actually a couple of weeks ago. The last domestic car dealership within the city limits of San Francisco closed its doors. There are now no American car dealers in San Francisco, which I actually wonder in every major city how many dealerships are actually within the city limits. Like how many car dealerships might there really be within the New York city limits or the Chicago city limits? It's probably very hard to have a car dealership in the middle of a big city. It takes a lot of land. But their point was, see, this is San Francisco again. They're not like us. They only drive foreign cars.
What is for sale still there? Do we know which?
Well, you can get, there are still BMW, Honda, Scion, Infiniti, and so forth dealers, just not any Chevrolet or Ford or Lincoln. Is that significant? Does that show that they're really not like us?
It's easier to park smaller cars there.
There
It's
you
also
go.
easier to park more stylish cars there. I don't know why that is.
Don't know why
I
that
just-
is.
yeah,
All right.
just-
So Elaine is
yeah.
saying
Yeah.
it's not a sign that they're.
I actually got excited for a second because I thought you were going to say they just didn't have car dealers at all anymore because they were all riding their bikes. And
Oh,
mopeds
wouldn't you
and-
love that?
And skateboards.
Yeah,
and- yeah.
they paraglide
Yeah.
to work there. Yes. All right. Well, we've talked about so many crazy ideas involving schools and school funding. It was reported this week that there's a $2 million project in the SAISD in which cameras are installed. Have you heard about this? In school cafeterias to observe what foods children select and what they eat and what they don't eat, and if they seem to be enjoying it, and to estimate how many calories each student is scarfing down. I mean, really?
Ask the cafeteria workers what they like.
You don't have cameras on the tables at the restaurant, Louis. How do you know what people eat?
Well, especially with children, let them eat whatever they want to while they can.
Can I write that down?
Yeah.